Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a Soka researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy the conversation.
Hello, my name is Robb Meade. I am currently in Groton, Connecticut, the submarine capital of the world. And my job is currently working with active duty service members, helping them transition from the active duty space to being a civilian again.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rob. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. That was a tremendous fun fact you just, threw out there casually. I did not know that. And I'm so excited that, similar to, I guess, your city that you're living in, we're going to be getting into a submarine and we're going to go underneath the waters and go deep into your story and
Oh boy.
learn more about kind of the work that you're doing, and especially right with this transition period, right, from active duty and then civilian. I know that could be very, very difficult, right, because of traumas and kind of expectations and how their life kind of was structured and this and that, and kind of like what that entails, and just also everything in between, like from what brought you to that work. So very excited. And I'll kind of let you share out your story. If you can maybe take us through some of the milestones, like the big turning points of kind of what brought you to the work that you're doing. And feel free to kind of take us back however far you'd like, because, I'm sure there's a lot of different seeds planted in terms of how you got there.
Oh, yeah. All right, so let's go way back until I was 3 years old. Yes, exactly 3 years old. My dad bought me my first chef's knife. I don't know why he trusted me with a giant piece of sharp steel, but he did. And so I would always help him around the kitchen. And so fast forward until I'm like 17, I'm about to go into college. I go, I'm going to do what everybody does. I'm just going to go straight from high school to college. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I just guess I'll go into like childcare because kids are cool. It worked for a little while, but then like through my third year, I was like, I'm not actually doing anything I want to do. I'm just kind of researching it. And anytime I go in, I feel like I'm not actually getting to where I want to be. So I dropped out. And about 6 months after I dropped out, I started culinary school. So that was kind of where it came back. My dad always told me, you don't want to be a chef, never be a chef. And so, of course, finally, I was like, I'm going to be a chef. Why not? So I go through that, finished culinary school. It was phenomenal. I did pastry and baking. I was fantastic at cooking. I was horrible at baking. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go ahead and start baking, learn how to do that. So I made like 3-foot chocolate sculptures and like a 4-foot sugar sculpture. It was ridiculous, but it was fun. So I graduated from Le Cordon Bleu in Portland, Oregon. And then I just had a hard time finding a job that was, that I could keep. I went around, I was a baker, I went into cake decorating, which I don't like doing cake decorating at all, ever again, please no. And then I would just do a whole bunch of different things around the kitchen. And then eventually I was like, this isn't sustainable. I can't hold anything down for long enough. So I joined the US Navy. And it was kind of a funny story because I went in, I scored like a 98, which is, one away from perfect on the entrance test. They're like, you can be anything you want. You can be like a nuclear engineer. You can be a cryptologist. And I'm like, I want to be a cook. And the guy's like, no, we don't have any of those spots open. You have to be something that's better, that's like way cooler than that. And I was like, all right, I bet the Air Force has something. And I got up and started walking. He's like, no, just kidding. We have spaces. Get back here. So 2 weeks later, I joined the Navy. So I was in the Navy for about 8 years as a cook. I cooked for maybe 3 months out of the 8 years that I was in the Navy as a cook. My entire career was very confusing, but it was fantastic. I did logistics. I loaded C-17s and C-5s with the Air Force and sent them around the world. I worked with, some chefs at the White House, just preparing stuff. I worked for some admirals. I really just got to do a whole bunch of really cool things. I learned how to do maintenance on an aircraft, and I got to be in the cockpit and learn how to do the brakes. I went for a 2-hour flight in my aircraft. I was underwater in a submarine, so I got to do a whole bunch of different really neat stuff. Most of it didn't connect to my job, but I loved it. And so when I got out, I actually got out with a medical separation or medical retirement. So I found out I was going to get out of the military. I had about 3 weeks to prepare after 8 years in the Navy with no real idea of what I was going to do. Wife and a about 6 month old kid and a 10-year old puppy. So all of us figured out within 3 weeks we have to figure out what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. Got out, had no idea. Flopped around for a while. Finally went back, got my bachelor's in sociology from Oregon State. Uh, and that led me a week later to the job I'm at now. I had somebody that I worked with while I was in the military. They actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, I saw you finished your degree. We have a job open up. You should apply." And so I applied, thinking, "Oh, well, maybe it's a reach. That's fine." A week later, I had an interview, and it was the weirdest thing because I went back to work my first day, and since I had already worked there as like active duty, a year later I came back as a civilian, and I knew everybody except for 3 people. So people were like running up and giving me hugs, and I was like, "Okay, this is not your normal first day at work. Hi, everyone." So it was interesting, just kind of going from where I was back to where I kind of started, where I got out of the Navy, is where I ended up getting that job. The same exact base. I teach in the same exact classroom that I learned that class from. So it's just been kind of this full circle. Got out, didn't know what to do. Now I'm back to where I started, trying to help other people figure out what to do.
Wow, I love that full circle kind of moment that you find yourself in. And I know that probably there's still a lot of things that are kind of clearing up in terms of like how you're going to continue to push forward, right? With a new degree from a fancy place like Harvard, very soon at hand. But also, I think this idea of like giving back, really making an impact for those who are transitioning, so that they can really just dive into like filling kind of career, or integrate with society in a way that feels best for them and their families. And the fact that you, as you said, were kind of like flip-flopping or kind of like figuring things out, it was a little bit chaotic. You were able to make it work. But for those who aren't able to have that, right, it can be disastrous, right? And that's stuff that we don't often hear about. I'm sure you've interacted with many, many, um, you know, like now civilians, right, who are just struggling, right? And so I think that definitely sounds like it's like the clarion call, like I need to do this. But it took a while, took a little while. But yeah, I love this journey. It was just it just kind of felt like it almost just feels like you're like a free spirit, and you're like guided by like, this interests me, this is going to be fun, let's just go all in there. And then all of these opportunities opened up to you, and you gained so many different skills. Because initially, right, you introduced like, oh yeah, working for the Navy. But then when I say, okay, tell me your story, and then you say 3-year-old with chef's knife, and then and then there's culinary school involved, and there's like daycare, like maybe I go in that direction, maybe I don't. The score at the score with this Navy test, and being like, I want to be a cook. I just feel like you subvert expectations. Is that something that you do intentionally, or you're just like, this is just me?
I've always been one that said, if you try to give me a challenge, not only am I going to prove that I can do it, I'm going to find a different way to do it that proves that you're even more wrong. And I didn't do that as like an insult. I did it more as like I want to see how I can stretch the boundaries of what this is supposed to be and bring this to something where I can show you we can make it a little bit more if we try a little harder or in a different way. And that's kind of always been how I've approached everything. It annoys many people, it annoys my mom, and annoys my wife. But it was an interesting tool in the military because it's such a rigorous set. This is how we do things. That I came in my first command. It generally speaking, to make like second class, which is like, it's called E5. It's the fifth highest of the enlisted ranks. It's kind of where you almost start being an adult in the Navy. Generally speaking, for what my job was, it takes 6 years, give or take. I was there in a year and a half. So I kind of went straight up to, this is where I am. I'm going to start leading people. So I'm still trying to figure out what the Navy is. And I'm now leading people going, I don't know what we're all doing, but we're going to do it. And so that kind of led into how I interacted with everybody. So even like you're supposed to address everybody by like rate rank. So like I was CS2, so you're like CS2 Meade. That would be like my name. And so every time I would see anyone, no one would call me CS2. Everyone would call me Meade, my last name. Everybody. It didn't matter if it was somebody that worked for me or the commander of the squadron. He would see me and be like, "Hey Meade, what's up?" And that is like a huge no-no. Like what you're not supposed to do. But it was everybody. So it was just that that's the way I approach things. I'm going to get it done. I'm going to find a way to do it. So ask me to do it and don't give me all of this blah, blah, blah. I want to know like how I can make this happen. And so one time we were in Wisconsin and one of the aircraft parts broke and the nearest one was like 100 miles away. And so they were talking like, oh, all right, we got to figure out how to do this. So let's get like a chief or like a senior chief, so like one of the higher ranking enlisted, and we'll figure out how to get it done. They can go over and get there, so we know it's trustworthy. And then the command master chief, who's the highest enlisted in the actual command, just goes, just have me do it. And I'm sitting there like, well, you just said have like one of the guys up there. He's like, no, you can get it done. And so I drove 100 miles to get this $1 million aircraft part, and just because I told them I would figure it out no matter what, and they trust me to do that wherever it was. So it didn't matter that it had nothing to do with cooking. They'd go find an aircraft part at a FedEx and 100 miles away and bring it back to us. Okay, got it.
Mission accomplished. Did they should have installed like instead of like the bat signal, they had like the meat signal. Maybe it's just
Oh
like two
god,
chefs like knives, and then that was your call to just get stuff done.
I feel like I knew it was there even though they didn't shine it. Like Batman showed up when there wasn't the bat signal and he knew there was danger. I feel like every time there was trouble and something was about to go wrong, I just happened to be nearby. So either I attracted it or I didn't need a Rob signal and I just showed up there.
No, I think that's amazing. And then, the piece about like trust, and then, you just kind of taking action and just being persistent until it was done right, because you
Yeah.
can't do it, kind of like haphazardly, because, again, this is like a very expensive equipment that we're talking about. And yeah, so, you said that like that kind of personality of yours, right? To kind of like set the bar high, be relentless until you reach it. And, like, people kind of pick up on your, I don't know, your work ethic by being like, okay, Meade's going this way. Like, well, let's follow after him, or let's get things done. But it could also kind of rub some people the wrong way, right? You're saying how, it kind of annoyed your mom, your wife. But like, would you say that like your personality, maybe not so much with your mom, did it resonate with your dad or with anyone else, like kind of growing up? Or were you just kind of like this one off and then people, were just like, oh, Rob, like I don't know, like was there any kind of like particular influence that you can kind of point to?
So it's funny because when you bring up my dad was not around. He was. I'll be very candid. My dad was addicted to drugs when I was a child. I had flashbacks of him doing heroin in front of me. He was not a good person, and he didn't work. Spent all the money that my mom made, and so when my mom finally left him, I didn't have such a good impression of who he was as a person. So not only did I have this kind of aspect of, he wasn't a good person, it was I'm going to do everything in my power forever to make myself better than him at every aspect of life. I will never be that person. And no matter what, I will do better. And so from then on, it annoys my mom because she knows why. And she knows that she's kind of the same. She will do everything for me. She'll, go without. There was times where she wouldn't eat. We were very poor growing up. So there was times where she wouldn't eat just so I could. I mean, I would have like bologna rolled up into a little roll and she would make it exciting because that was my lunch. But really, that was all we could afford is like two pieces of bologna rolled up. And so it's what it was. But knowing that she had done all of that for me when I started getting older and started realizing all of the things that, she had to go through, um, it kind of fueled me more. So she gets frustrated because she thinks that I don't need to do so much or work so hard because she did that. But at the same time, a lot of my um, drive to like get not necessarily better than other people, but to improve myself to the point where I don't think that I can do better, is coming from that sense of I don't ever want to be who my father was. And so I take that into my work, into my relationship. My wife would tell you that is my biggest fear is becoming my father, and I'll tell her that every time. And she knows that if I'm having like a really bad day and she can see something's wrong, that's one of the things she will usually say to me is, "You're not your dad. It's fine. You're doing a good job." And so when I have those issues where I feel like I'm not doing enough, that's where that kind of I'll slump down, and then I'll remind myself like, I've done so much to get where I was. I mean, came from poverty. I was sleeping on couches before I joined the military. Me and my wife got out of the military. We were homeless for about 6 months, didn't have anywhere to go. We were sleeping on families' couches, and then we moved in with our parents for a year or two. We didn't have anything. And then when I finally got this job, it was like I'm pulling us out of that. And now it's like it's such an odd thing to go from like joining the military because I don't have anywhere to live and I don't want to owe more people to now I'm in like this middle class federal job in a nice apartment with my wife and kid and not having to worry about things so much. And so it's that weird kind of the reason I'm here and the reason I've got to where I am is because I've pushed so much against where I came from, but only in like a very specific, I need to be better than where I came from mindset.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Rob, for sharing that because there's a lot of trauma,
Mm.
and being born into that kind of like dynamic where your father for whatever reason, I'm sure there's a much longer story there.
He was a Vietnam veteran, so he had seen
Oh,
a
that's
lot.
right.
He still struggles with PTSD. I talked to him. We've made our amends. I've
Mm,
talked to him recently. He's not doing well, but he's doing better than he used to be.
right.
So but he went through a lot, especially through the Vietnam War. So he had a lot of baggage he was carrying through his life. A lot of the horrors that some of the people I'm working with now see. So I now and future me, especially in my position now, I kind of understand it. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it's like as a kid and growing up as like a teenager, I decided it.
Yeah, no, I mean like that says a lot about the kind of trauma that we all like hold on to like different traumas, but like the severity, right, of
Yeah.
going through something like Vietnam, and then the kind of like intergenerational kind of like trauma that can happen through that as he's trying to process or cope with all of that, and then you kind of trying to make lemonade from lemons, right? You're kind of like there suddenly was this drive, right, where you were trying to prove right yourself, and that some might say, well, that's very productive, right? But then and another one, like if you kind of push so hard that like you're going to the limits of your own physical body, right? Then you need that person from outside, like maybe your mom, your wife, a good friend, whoever, to kind of reel you back because clearly, right, you are enough, right? You're doing great. You are not your father, right?
Yeah.
And but at the same time, right, the influence is we're so tied to each other, right? That like, well, if it wasn't for your father, I don't know, like the whole like knife in the kitchen thing, would that have been like would you have gone to culinary school? Maybe, but also, right, I mean like there's something to that where that was like the first story that kind of shot out of you, that is kind of hilarious and problematic and wonderful
Mhm.
all at the same time, and yeah, so I mean that's that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that our parents, right, are like such influential people in our lives growing up. Your mom sounds incredibly noble and awesome and badass, so
She is. Don't worry.
big shout out to the mom if you're listening. And yeah, so I kind of wanted to ask though, like um, found yourself like really interested in cooking, right? I'm just really fascinated by that because you initially went to college intending to get a degree. You mentioned something about childcare,
Yeah. Early
but
childhood education.
yeah. So and then you were just like, nope, don't want to do this. Like, could you maybe share a little bit more about like what was it like stepping into like having that focus, like that shifts away from one career, one kind of objective, and then just going into the next one? Like, was that a relatively easy decision for you? And then also, were there any kind of like bumps along the way as you were kind of, you know, shooting towards that next goal?
Uh, there were plenty of bumps along the way. So the first 2 years I was at college, I was actually still in high school. I did like the Running Start program, so I didn't go to high school at all. My junior and senior year, I went full time to college, which was probably no one should do that because you need interaction with people your age. I'm sitting down for lunch with like people that are 35 complaining about having to work a graveyard shift, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. So just having to go to that. Um, and then after I actually graduated high school, so 2 years into college, technically I'm a junior, going into my first year being out of high school. And so I, didn't go to like all the freshman classes that everybody was in. So I didn't build those, same sort of bonds as everybody, going, let's go to our first year. Everybody's introducing to each other. We all have the same classes. I didn't have that because I was already in like 300 level classes doing research papers at the age of 18. And I'm like, oh God, why? So I go through that, and like the first actual time I realized that I don't know if this is what I want to do was when I did a study abroad program in Germany. Funny enough, I went to an army base and did daycare, but it wasn't because I didn't like it, and it wasn't because I wasn't good at it. It's just because this was something that I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to stay in. And I kind of already knew that. Like, I really enjoyed working with kids. I mean, I had a really difficult class, two kids with autism, and they threw me in it by myself and said, good luck. And I'm like, all right, this is fun. But I mean, I went through it. It took me like, a month and a half, and then everything was great. Everybody was happy. But then class changed because military, so the entire class changed because there was, deployments and people that moved. And so it was just like one of those ones where it's like, I know I'm not good at staying still. And if I'm going to be in a job where I have to stay still, other things not staying still kind of make it very difficult, especially when it's something as, you know, tenuous as children trying to get on, a same schedule, same rapport, kind of understanding. So I actually failed out of that, not because I wasn't good and not because I didn't do the work, but because I went to a reggae concert and that was against the rules. So things happen. So I came back and just I didn't really have the drive to do it anymore. I signed up for fall classes after the summer internship, and I was just like, I went to like 2 days, and I was like, I'm gonna not do this anymore. So I just dropped out. And I think that decision was relatively easy because it was just kind of one of those ones where I was like, it was almost a weight off my shoulders. Like this is something that I felt like I had to do, not like I wanted to do. And so I dropped out, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to culinary school because this is great. And I mean, first day in culinary school, I was like, all right, I'm really nervous. Is this the right choice or not? And then we have like everybody's supposed to do, basic stuff, cookies, brownies, cakes, a custard, just to see where everybody's at. And so like they had one team working on one team working on the other. And like I literally did all four and went to the chef and I was like, I did it. And he's like, what? And I was like, you said do them. He's like, I meant do one. I was like, oh, well, sorry, I did them all. Do I need to do anything else for today? And he's like, yeah, help the other people. They're not doing so good. So that's where I just kind of was like, all right, well, this seems like somewhere where I can be because other people are struggling at making like brownies. And I'm like, all right, well, can we get to the fun stuff? Because I've been doing this for a while. Uh, and then that even carried into like when I was in the Navy going culinary, like when we were in school, we're supposed to be learning stuff. There's people that had never touched a knife. And they're like, all right, pick up your knife and cut vegetables. I'm like, no, no, no. We're going to teach them how to hold the knife first. Please, teacher, walk out. I will teach the class today because that was really not a good choice. And they did. And I taught the class and they're like, okay, well, you got this now.
Did you like just have like this innate ability for cooking, or like since the age of 3 you were just always kind of like cooking in some way, shape, or form, and then that just kind of carried on to like you just kind of like learning in practice, or maybe with your mom? What was yeah?
So my dad was actually an executive chef at Walt Disney World Resort in Vero Beach, Florida. So I spent plenty of time in the kitchen with him, um, kind of just like learning how kitchens work, how brigade systems work. So everybody's got to make their own thing, and then eventually they set it all together. And then my grandmother, so my mom's mother, loved baking, and she would bake all the time. And anytime I got a chance, I would be in the kitchen with her learning how to bake something. And to the point where it's like I got all of her old recipes from my aunt because they were like, "How do you translate this? I don't understand what a pinch or a glob means." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's this much." And so they were like, "Okay." So just kind of learning. My dad was very visual. My grandmother was even like a visual baker. You're supposed to follow a strict recipe, but she would literally be like a glob of this, a handful of that, a dash of that. And you're like, okay, this is not scientific. This is not like a measured recipe. How am I supposed to make this? And so I would take that and just be like, all right, I can run with it because I'll figure it out. Whereas like they were like, this never comes out right. How do you do it? Because they're trying to like measure out what is a glob, an ounce? Is it a teaspoon? I'm like, no, it's just like that much.
It's a glob. That
Yeah.
what more do you need to say? Wow. So yeah, so it's kind of like your family like kind of enveloped you with the just cooking frenzy, right? Like or baking or very hands on. It sounds like kind of tactile, right? This is this, and like the visual aspect of it. What was like? So it's clear that like you were able to observe and get a lot of practice with chefs that knew what they were doing clearly.
Yeah.
What is it about cooking that you particularly like? It's definitely maybe not like the precision science because it sounds like you've learned how to you know what a glob is, um, but like is there something about the I don't know, is it the artistry of it? Is it the utility of it? Is it the process and mindset going into it? Organization? I mean, there's so much, but like, could you identify one thing that really resonates with you?
The sheer chaos. So instead of it being something, you can have everything measured out and everything prepared to go. And I worked at a restaurant where, we had everything ready. And then suddenly 80 people come in the door and not with a reservation. And you've got to go, oh God, we'll get it done. So we had like a Valentine's Day one year where we like just opened like 6 months prior. And we were expecting 80, 100 people. We had 370 that night. And it was like, we all got to the end and we're like, how did what happened? Like we were supposed to close at like 9. It's almost 1 a.m. and we're still trying to like clean up and reset. And it's like, okay, but the sheer chaos, everybody getting through that sheer chaos together
Mm.
is kind of the interesting part because you've got so many parts in the kitchen. You've got prep, pantry, desserts. You've got your line cook. You've got your head chef. You've got all of these people. The waitresses out front, the bartenders. Everybody's doing their own part, but inside that chaos, everybody still knows how to communicate and get everything done. Even if it's not perfect, there's obviously, wrong things get sent to wrong tables. Things happen all the time. It's a restaurant. It's going to happen whether it's busy or not. But inside that massive amount of chaos, still having 15 people that at the end of the night, go, hey, that was great. See you tomorrow. Even after that insane chaos of frustration and everybody's so over it and going, all right, see you tomorrow. And you expect more chaos. That chaos that binds everybody together in kitchens is the thing that fascinates me the most.
Wow, that's very well said. And it's kind of sounds like that's the trust being built that like that person in that one station or responsible for that one thing is going to carry out that amidst all of the chaos. And then it's kind of like this like almost like a storm, right? Kind of you're all on this ship, you're getting like the waves are just kind of relentlessly hitting you back and forth. There's like no sense of like direction, and you're taking on water. You're just like, we're not going to make it out of this storm, and yet somehow the skies part, and like you're fine. It's just I feel like it's too perfect an analogy because you also worked in the Navy as a
Yeah,
cook, and so like that literally could have been happening. Who knows? But yeah, that's really interesting because I thought you were going to say something like along the lines of like, like I don't know, like setting like certain tasks or like challenging myself to like create something better, and then you were just like chaos, chaos.
chaos is what binds us.
It is, yeah. Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. But I still think that it definitely ties to the drive, right? That's kind of led you to all these different jobs because, in chaos, people are looking for an anchor, right? People are looking for like someone who is like solid, that can inspire them. And it could be multiple people, ideally, but sometimes
Yeah.
it's only one person.
Hmm.
And it sounds like, your personality was like, like it has to be me. I'm going to, go out even if it's just by myself, and make sure that the work is getting done on my end. But then people feel that as like a rally call, right? So, you spent a lot of time on a ship being a Navy cook and probably went to many different places all around the world. And as well as, you did many different jobs and were asked to do many different things. But I'm just curious, like the kind of travel aspect of kind of moving from one place to the next, maybe meeting with people from different perspectives or different backgrounds. Was global citizenship ever kind of talked about, or was it just like U.S. Navy, America, hoorah?
All right. So, clarification, I was never on a ship. I spent a little bit on it, but I did aviation for the first 5 years, and then I was on a submarine base with submarines the last three. So, I never actually got to do a deployment on a ship. However, I had gone to many countries. So, if you think of the Navy as like a whole, there's 128 naval bases, and 55 of them are on separate countries or on separate territories. So, you're looking at, over a third of them aren't even in the United States. Part of that projection of power thing that they like to tote so much. But if you think of like their mission statement as well, their mission statement states like alongside our allies and partners, we defend freedom. So it's not even this concept of like we do this, we do this. Even if you look at like the core of what the Navy's philosophy is, it kind of speaks slightly to that global citizenship. And it's interesting because every place I go, it's not just a military base for the U.S. It's joint military base. So when I was in Misawa, Japan, it's a joint base with U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, and the Japanese. Yeah, I think it was Japanese Air Force because it was an air base. So even then, we were kind of integrated into how we did things. It played both the U.S. and the Japanese national anthem every day. So it wasn't just like one or the other. It was kind of like a mixture of two come together. There was kind of like a US side and a Japanese side. The US side had like, Popeye's chicken and all of that. And then like the Japanese side had like this cool little vending machine that you get a ticket out and go get like your ramen from the counter. So it was like very different, but it was so like they were so kind of immersed in each other that it was hard to kind of tell them apart when you were on base. So it's similar to that every other place I've gone. And uh, somewhat close to that is a lot of the exercises that they do, especially in the aviation community. You can't just fly airplanes from one country and say this was a good training event because you don't actually get to see anything from anybody else. So the last training event we did, the last big one was in Vegas, and they think there was 13 separate countries all flying all at the same time, all doing their little radar jamming and all the crazy stuff that they do. And all of that to give each other information on how they could better their own militaries. So it's not like we're doing all of this because America wants all this information for ourselves. We're the best. It was like hey, we're going to go show you what our capabilities are. That way you can improve your defenses because this is obviously something that you guys are lacking. So next time you'll be better prepared for when, aircrafts like ours come. And so the entire time it was just it it was working with everybody from different countries. It never felt like I was going, this is the US and we're doing the US things for the US. Even though like some people have that mindset, you're gonna have people that have that mindset. But the overall mission never felt like that. It always felt like we're doing something either with or for or alongside another country to better either the area or our cooperation together. It was never just that like we're better than you, ha.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that perspective because I've never been in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. This notion of like American power and how it's projected out there. I think from like broad strokes, I think of it as like, yeah, number of military bases and just the assumption that like they're calling the shots, right? But what you're describing is much more nuanced and the actual like kind of practical things that take place on a base that you need to do,
Right.
and none of that can take place without this coordination, right? Knowing how to communicate well with one another, how to run these activities and make sure that like it goes off without a hitch, or that if something is awry, they share that information, that data, because it's going to make everything better, right? And that I don't think is, yeah, something that I had really thought too deeply about. So I think that's really important. And then the fact that you're kind of um, exposed, right, to not only that that from like people from different countries, right, but also like the foods that they're eating, and being like, wow, that's different. I'm sure you probably could have tried the ramen ticket and just you know went there to be adventurous.
Definitely did a few times.
Yeah, yeah, and then, or you could have just been like, I just love Popeyes and I'm just gonna get chicken.
Could
You
only
could do
have it
that
so
too.
many times.
And yeah, you probably experienced all of it. But yeah, I think that it's just something that I'm like thinking about in terms of like how we think of like global citizenship, because from what it sounds like, there's this sense that like there's a shared goal when it comes to the Navy, and in order to reach that goal, you have to yeah, work well with others who maybe do things a little differently, but ultimately, right, like kind of growing through that experience. Would that be kind of, does that ring true in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's different because you've got so many different aspects of the Navy that have so many different missions going on all at the same time. And so some you've got like the humanitarian peacekeeping missions. Some you've got like the aggression and diversion missions. Like when you're in off the Horn of Africa, there's a definite like sense of what you're doing and that versus like if you respond to a natural disaster in the U.S., this is a focus, this is what we need to do, and we know how to do that. And so working with both local and international is just kind of one of those things where it's similar to like my mindset. It's not what we're trained to do, but our job isn't what we normally say is our job isn't what our job is in the Navy. So like my job was a cook, but that was never my job. My job was to be a sailor, and that means doing whatever the Navy calls me to do. And so a lot of the people know this. Like, yeah, you have a job, and that's normally your job. But if they say do something else, you're going to do something else. And so having that flexibility to be able to go, yeah, right now I'm in this like war fighting posture and I've got to be aggressive and ready to go. But next week I could be on like the HMS Mercy giving out food packets to somebody that just had an earthquake. And so
Mhm.
having that ability to like, horizontally shift in where you're working, but doing kind of the same mission in a broad aspect is it's kind of a weird thing to juggle from um, kind of a lower perspective. When you're looking from it up high, yeah, it makes sense. You've got all of these chess pieces, they've got to be in the right place. But when you're like down in the trenches, you're like, what do you mean I've got to go hand out food packets? There's so much stuff we've got to do. And it's like, well, no, this is the important thing right now. Go do it.
Mm.
So that cross kind of cultures and cross working only works as well as the leadership lets it. Because
Mm.
if they don't let people do what they're supposed to do, or if they don't tell them what or why they're doing it, oftentimes they'll hit slight rebelliousness. And
Mm.
so you'll have that story where it's like, they don't want to, or they're not going to do the best that they can, that you hear kind of like, oh, they're just going to half ass it. Um,
Mm.
that's only usually because somebody doesn't give them the information understanding like this is why this is important.
Yes.
So that the hard part of it is why is it important and why do we need to do it? And getting that into kind of a global perspective can be difficult for someone from like, in the middle of nowhere, Iowa that doesn't know I've, 3,000 people in my city. How am I supposed to understand that this is like this huge mission that's going to, affect millions of people? So, I know everybody in my town because we got one stoplight.
Yes.
So just translating that from like how do we get everyone to jump on the understanding of doing this kind of across all places
And
without oh go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to ask, like, do you think that that is? what is needed for every single person to have that bigger picture, or do you think it could still work even at that grunt level, and people, as long as the leadership is intact and like knows what's going on, then it should still work just as fine?
So we have the kind of saying crap rolls downhill, but information has a hard time going through the crap. Um, it's oftentimes the work comes down and they say work and they don't know why. But sometimes when the information catches up and you go, oh, this is why we need to do that, cool, we'll put in the extra effort and make sure we stay late and get it done. Not understanding why is probably the most frustrating thing of like, lower military and like the lower enlisted levels is because you feel like, I mean, when I joined, I was 23. So imagine a 23-year-old just being told, hey, go sweep that, go mop that, without telling them why. Hey, you've got to sweep everything and mop everything because an admiral is coming, and the admiral is the one that lets us know how much funding we get for next year. There's big reasons why now I want to sweep him up, right?
It
Because he'll have
sounds
more
very
funding because
important.
I'll get better things. But if
Yeah.
you're just told, hey, go sweep him up the floors, you're going to be like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. And you're going to take forever because then you won't get asked again. So I don't think it's necessarily arming them with every piece of information because that's going to overwhelm most people, but arming them with the at least a reason why they need to do the specific task that they're doing. So I never tell anybody like, "Hey, go do this," and then not have a reason why. Because I don't. And at least when I was in the military, I would never tell somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself. So if I'm going to tell you to do it, I should be willing to do it or have done it myself. That will be what makes me. But if you don't know why you're doing it, even if it's just you need to do this because it's going to help improve everybody's day around here, that should be good enough information because that's going to let you know why. If you're mad that you're going to make everybody's day better, then we need to have a bigger conversation about like what your job is and what you're doing. But if I tell you this is why you're doing it, you're going to be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I'll go take care of it. It's a lot easier to digest that you have to take care of like, a crappy job if you understand that this crappy job is going to result in something good.
Right. Yeah, with that information, it allows them to have this greater appreciation for the work that they're doing, right? That kind of like awareness that you were speaking about. And from that, I think a greater sense of like fulfillment, right? Or purpose, right? That this is why I'm doing it, right? This is how it's contributing to a larger piece of the puzzle. And I think that when it comes to like any kind of organization, being able to have that kind of relationship with your supervisor where there's like, again, enough trust to be like, I'm sharing what what you need to know, maybe not share oversharing because then it can be overwhelming, but enough for them to feel valued, right? So they can carry out the work and know that it's ultimately for the greater good, right? But then what happens when none of that happens and then they're left feeling empty inside and disillusioned and feeling rebellious or just kind of despondent and I don't want to do anything. um, you can see how it probably compounds over years, and frustration of maybe stagnation. Sorry, just kind of now I'm like doom spiraling, but like I think when coupled with like very very stressful environments, like perhaps there's a war going on, right? Combat zone, whatever it is, right? That's where some of the major trauma can probably set in. And then I kind of want to do this transition to the work that you're doing right now because now you're trying to transition them to civilian life. And so how is, like, maybe just share a little bit about like the work that you're currently grappling with and like working on to, like, what is it like a day in the life for Robb Meade and supporting them?
All right. So what my job is technically it's there's a congressionally mandated program called the Transition Assistance Program. Um, it's essentially kind of this multi-part stage where they go through a set of trainings to somewhat learn what they're going to do next. And it's not the most perfect system, but it's better than, you know, 20 years ago when they didn't have anything. So the first day is generally training with me. So I'll go through, what like the change of paces, change of culture, how the language is going to change. A lot of them, you think about people that have gone in the military, they go straight from high school into the military, they work in the military for 20 years. Now they're 38 and retiring and finding their first job outside the military. Well, they've never written a resume. They don't know how. If I tell them, hey, come dressed in, business casual, they don't know what that means. They're like, does a flannel count? It has buttons. So you need to like kind of guide them into like, well, these are some of the certain things that you will run into. You will run into, not like you might. And so just kind of guiding, I do anything from like somebody that's been in for, 2 years and is getting separated administratively because they, did something bad and now they're getting, you know, I still have to do that. I still have to do the training with them. I had somebody in my class 2 weeks ago that had been in for 39 years between active duty and reservist. So having to do the training from, anybody that's a baby to somebody who has been going through it for a while, it's the same kind of concept as like you're going from this place where like you can say all the things you want, like you can yell at your boss in the military and you can be really bad at your job. Like I'm saying horrifically bad at your job in the military. You will not lose it. You will keep your job. You won't get promoted. You won't get any extra additive things, but you can be really bad and keep your job. I tell them, if you are one of those people that are really bad at the job, and you know who you are, if you are, you're not going to keep the job if you get out and you have a civilian job. Because if you're bad at it, they're just going to fire you. They don't need a reason. They can just say, you're not working out, goodbye. And so, kind of the different aspects of like, you can't talk to your supervisors a certain way. Because in the military, I can look back to my supervisor because I think he's being, not the smartest person in the world. So I'll say a few words back to him that are pretty choice and he doesn't like it. I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm not going to lose my job. As a civilian, you do that. So having that kind of candid conversation, especially having been through the military and done that transition, a lot of the questions are, what are my benefits like? You have people that have been in, different wars, different combat zones. I don't know what my benefits are. Well, this is how you apply for them, and this is what you get. I can't guarantee you're going to get something because it's through the VA. I work with the VA. The VA does their own training. I work with the Department of Labor. They do their own training. I work with the Small Business Administration. They do their own training. But we all kind of work in this one giant program under Congress to make sure that everybody kind of gets these opportunities. The problem with the program is currently it's really hard to get somebody to stay in a position like mine for a long time. There is just a massive, overwhelming amount of information that you need to know just to be able to like understand the program. Even just starting, most people have at least a year of training, and they can't even keep them for the year. So, getting to a point where like you're comfortable answering all these questions, it's hard to get somebody to stay. But even if you do, it's difficult to get them to stay in the right areas because New England, we have, I think, 5 bases that should have it, and 2 of them do. The other 3, they lost their person and they don't have anything. So me and the one other base are picking up all the extra slack, which is fine. But we can only have, by Congress's mandate, 50 people in our class every 2 weeks. And I'm at 50 every 2 weeks. I don't have room in my classes for more. So if that other base shuts down, they just have to do it online without somebody to be able to answer their questions. So it gets to a point where it's like, I mean, I wish I would have paid more attention and sunk my teeth more into this information when I was getting out, which is why I'm so like vigorous in saying, hey, pay attention to me. You're going to want to know this. Like, this is how you get your VA disability claim. You're going to want to know how to do this. Trust me, because in 5 years, it's going to be a lot harder and getting them to get through it. But just the lack of clear guidance in the space, I think I'm one of like 6 master trainers in the Navy for the entire TAP program, and that's globally. So you're looking at, you have 128 bases, you have 6 master trainers, and you probably don't even have TAP people at half of those bases. So I have people from Guam, from Italy, from, Japan calling me at whatever hour in the morning it is for them to ask me about benefits, like their education benefits, because they don't have the right people and they don't have the amount of people. So my card gets handed out and said, hey, call this guy. He works these hours. And then they wake up at 3 a.m. to give me a phone call to ask about their school. So the program itself, if you had the people and the infrastructure to do it, much like anything else, if you had the people and infrastructure, it would work great. But you don't. The Army is significantly better at doing this program than the Navy or really any other branch. They have the most people that separate every year. So they have this massive infrastructure to do it, whereas the Navy is, pennies to the dollar on what the Army's putting into the TAP program. So it's interesting having like this concept of, everybody in the military gets out and they just become a civilian. Well, Army has a much different path to becoming a civilian and much different kind of support to become a civilian than the Navy, than the Marines, than the Coast Guard. And so you've got to think from my point of view when I'm trying to train somebody, it's like somebody's going out through the Army, you've got a lot more support through your actual command, through your commander, whereas the Navy, it's like, all right, we did that training and now you're good to go, and that's it. So you've got to try and, keep in perspective for me, not only do I have to train you, but how much more support are you going to get when I'm done with what I need to do in the last like 6 months to a year that you have left? You need to come back and see me again because I know you're not going to have that support. Or am I confident going, all right, you have a resume. I believe in you to get a job. High five, you're good to go. And so that kind of, it almost depends on where they're going, like what location they're going to. Do I know that there's somebody there that can kind of pick up the slack where I'm not going to be? Or is it something where I know that they're in a certain branch where they can pick up the slack where I'm not going to be there? Or is it just something where I don't have a choice? I've had people the Friday before they get out of the military at 3:30 come into my office, hey, can you teach me that tap thing? And I go, that is a 5-day course, and I have 30 minutes left before I hit not allowed overtime by the federal government. So I can give you some books, and I can give you my business card when you have questions on Monday. Like, that's all I can do. But that's the kind of things that like fall through the cracks where it's not just, one or two. There's people falling through. This is congressionally mandated, but I think a year out from when you're going, you're supposed to have this thing called your initial counseling done, which is where a counselor sits down and makes sure, like, all right, are we on the path to good or on the path to bad? And you have that, and you're supposed to submit it in our system a year in advance. Only like 60% of the military gets that done. So you're looking at 40% people that just don't even get that initial survey done, not to mention all the other training. So it's a great program, but it's just so incredibly hard to get adequate buy-in, especially from people who are already skeptical.
Wow. It sounds almost like Mission Impossible, given like the amount of funding and then just such small, group of master trainers. And they're very fortunate to have you, right? Because fortunate, right, for them, like you're able to get stuff done amidst the chaos, right? Similar to the kitchen, where it's just kind of like, all right, we gotta make things work, kind of like make miracles, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I like the kind of phrasing of like, well, not like I like it, but it's used a lot in schools, like public schooling of students who like fall through the cracks, right? That it does just the model doesn't serve them, and these are human lives that we're talking about, and they've served their country, and so we should really pay more attention to that. And so it sounds like you are on a mission to, in some ways, just like, I don't know if it's a full reinvention of it, but I'm sure like you're going to be looking at ways to like build out greater like education structures to facilitate like this kind of like less leakage, and maybe more training of trainers kind of situation. So I'm sure that probably ties into a little bit of what you're doing at a place like Harvard, but definitely kind of still getting going with kind of what this new career is like for you. So thank you so much, Rob. And we are kind of getting to the end of. I mean, I feel like there's so much we've only scratched the surface. Your
Yeah.
life has been like all over the place, and it's been thank you so much for also sharing some of the vulnerable points as well. But I just really appreciate this conversation. And I wanted to ask like a really short question. It's one that I ask all of my guests, but it's either a book or a movie recommendation or any recommendation. So what would you like to share with the listeners?
Um, let's see. If I'm trying to remember the name of it now, I'm blanking. Just one. Let's see. I'll do a book. If you haven't read The Witcher, it's a very interesting thing because not only Sorry, my dog's freaking out. Not only does it kind of go over different, it almost plays like different races in different worlds, but all at the same time. So not only is it just kind of this mindset of everything's happening all at once, but it's everywhere kind of at the same place. So I think it's very interesting kind of how everything is around how someone is different than they are. And that's like the general theme of the book. So
Mhm.
I'd suggest reading that if you hadn't.
There's also a video game too, right? And like a
I
TV
played every
show.
single one of them.
Nice. Yeah, very good. Well, thank you so much, Rob. I really appreciate you taking this time to share your story and to get us thinking more about the work that the Navy is doing. And then also, more importantly, right, that kind of like reintroduction, re-education into civilian life that I think is so important, right, in terms of contributing and having a fulfilling life post Navy. Yeah, thank you so much, Rob. And I want to give the last word to you. Any final thoughts or like a send off as we kind of close out our conversation?
Thank you. And I will kind of leave with one thing. I know it's kind of one of those things where everybody, not everybody, I don't want to generalize it, but many people think that the military is just this giant complex that's aggressive and wants to do, wartime everything. But you'll find out more than not, military members are more happy when it's peacetime because they can take care of their family, their friends, and people that they think matter. And so I want to kind of put an end to that little bit of stigma that, everybody's this angry military person that's going to, get rowdy and beat people up, because it's not true. Most people I met from the military are giant cuddly teddy bears, even the ones that look angry. So I'll leave it with that.